China threatens Australia with economic sanctions, the Tory party makes a move against the Chinese communists, and the Health Secretary Matt Hancock humiliates Robert Peston on live TV. Well, it looks like the tensions are rising between various countries in China. Today it's all about Australia and China. Obviously the Australian government have called into an international independent inquiry and investigation into what's happened in China. And the Chinese government are not too happy about this. They are now threatening to boycott trade with Australia. Now, these two countries are huge trading partners, and but the Australian government are not actually just giving up, which is kind of interesting. So let's start with this first, and then we're going to talk about the Conservative Party making a move against the Chinese Communist Party, as well as the role of the media in this country.
There seems to be rising tensions between China and Australia.
That's right, Lisa. In response to some comments made by the Chinese ambassador that were reported in the Australian Financial Review newspaper yesterday, essentially saying that Chinese consumers might stop sending their kids to Australian universities, might stop going for holidays in Australia, and stop purchasing Australian beef and wine if officials in that country weren't entirely upfront with the Globe and haven't been about the number of cases and the way that it was initially handled. Australia is viewing the comments from the ambassador as a threat.
Firstly, just see how childish China are being at this point. They're going to stop sending their kids to Australian universities. They're going to stop going to Australia for holidays, and they're going to stop buying Australian goods. What is this, primary school? But one of the Australian ambassadors, James Patterson, came out and immediately said that this is inappropriate, and you can't just randomly threaten a sovereign country.
Certainly inappropriate for a diplomat credentialed here in Australia to represent his country to threaten us with economic sanctions or consequences because we are simply pursuing what is in our national interest and frankly what's in the interests of the whole world. I mean, who would not want to get to the bottom of the exact origins of the virus, which we know originated in Wuhan, but we don't know exactly how. I think it's in the interests of the entire world, in the interest of combating this in the future, that we know exactly how it came about. And it's very concerning that the Chinese Communist Party thinks it's inappropriate that Australia would call for such a thing and thinks that it's completely fine for them to threaten us with economic consequences.
Well, he's right. And he also clarified that Australia are not just going to give up on this investigation. No one can randomly threaten them.
Absolutely. And the Foreign Minister, Maurice Payne, was very firm on this yesterday. Australia will not be deterred by China or anyone else trying to intimidate us into not pursuing this matter. It is a grave and serious matter, and it is in the interest of the global public health that we do pursue this, that we do get to the bottom of this.
Now, this is a massive sign that shows how the Chinese Communist Party are becoming desperate. This is basically all it is. They've been trying to control the World Health Organization, successfully actually, to shut down all these reports. They're banning any investigation inside China itself. And now they know that they've lost the support of President Trump and the US. They're now losing the support of the British government. And now we're going to have other big countries like Australia. This is just desperation.
What do you think it says? Well, you know, when their response is, well, you know, we might not buy your wine, we might not buy your beef. You know, does that show that, you know, they're being squeezed?
It doesn't seem a very positive signal at all, Peter. It shows that the Chinese Communist Party is extremely anxious to prevent an independent investigation into the origins of the virus. We know that from the way in which they reacted initially when the virus was discovered, when whistleblower doctors, nurses and scientists who called out that this may be in fact a serious virus that was transmitting between humans. Some were arrested, others were intimidated, others were coerced into silence.
I think there's a lot more to cover on this issue because whether this whole thing started in a lab or in a market, it doesn't really matter because it's how the Chinese government handled this whole situation. That's the problem. And how many people have disappeared in China because of this. So this isn't obviously looking good for the Chinese Communist Party. A lot of people are wondering whether the Chinese citizens eventually are going to rise up against their regime. That's kind of unlikely because for an authoritarian state, they are very authoritarian, very strong, and the likelihood of any uprising is kind of tiny. But we can only hope to see what kind of how it goes. But the Conservative Party in the UK are also coming up with initiatives. We mentioned a few days ago that they've set up a new campaign group in Parliament against China, the Chinese Communist Party, and we had Ian Duncan Smith on Julia Hartleyborough's show on Talk Radio saying this.
One big lesson we've got to learn is that our ridiculous addiction to China has now got to stop, and we have got to review across the whole of the free world just exactly how we got ourselves into this position, where we have treated an authoritarian, despotic regime as though it were some kind of freedom-loving organization and rushed to them to buy things, to get things produced, to the extent now that this that broke out in China, who clearly falsified their figures originally, did not declare this earlier because, as I pointed out recently, they desperately wanted this trade deal with America. This is a desperate situation, and we now have to look at this carefully. We cannot go on like this. We have to recognize that if a country does not support the rule of law, human rights, and full freedom of information, then we simply cannot deal with them in the way that we've been dealing with them.
Now, let's talk about the British media. As you know, I love to talk about the lamestream media, the broadcasters, who are, their job is supposed to be not only to scrutinize the British government, but we are a big country and we have international news outlets, BBC World News and Sky News, obviously everywhere. They're also supposed to be questioning everything and everyone. When was the last time the British mainstream media questioned World Health Organization or the Chinese Communist Party? Not really. So we have all these daily briefings that the government, Downing Street, are doing. I think today we're going to have Boris Johnson doing his first one. So the time you're watching this is either probably have done that already or someone else did it in his place. But we have journalists like Robert Peston, who is primarily a left-wing activist who now works for the ITV. And he usually comes on these to these daily briefings and starts ranting for like 2-3 minutes and eventually asks a question. This time, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, completely humiliated him on live TV by giving him this answer.
Thanks very much.
Could I just
of course.
one extra thing, actually, just on the life insurance, and just to be clear, there's nothing in this life insurance scheme that would waive the rights of the families of individuals who get COVID and either die or are seriously injured from, in a sense, suing the NHS in the traditional way if they feel they haven't been properly protected, particularly in the absence they might feel of appropriate PPE gear. There's no waiving of their standard employment rights involved in any of this.
No. Beth Rigby from Sky.
Imagine going through a trouble of like making a long speech and then a stupid question and then just get a one-word answer. No. So this isn't the first time Robert Peston has been destroyed at these daily briefings. The other day, his audio wasn't working, so Matt Hancock also made this joke.
Robert Peston, ITV. You are muted.
Yes, to be fair, that's the best way to deal with Peston. Mute him. So Robert Peston is basically useless. And is a great example of how the media shouldn't do what they do. So that's about the media. But let's give you an update on the Brexit trade negotiations. The whole relationship between the EU and Britain, that's still ongoing. We don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of months. But the government have come out, the British government, come out very strongly again to mention that level playing field is out of the question, fishery is out of the questions, and any strong cooperation that will make us politically aligned to the EU is out of the question. We now have Michael Gove earlier saying that there's a difference in philosophy between the UK and the rest of Europe. And that's the whole point of Brexit, the differences that we had. And even in this situation, he says that they need to treat us like the way they treat any other sovereign nation.
You're right that we've taken a different approach. And again, I think it's a sort of difference of philosophy. I can't be certain about the EU's thinking on this, but it does seem that their behaviour suggests that they regard the UK not as a fully sovereign independent state, but as a state which is in an association agreement style relationship with the EU. Association agreements tend to be used for countries that are on the path to EU membership. I mentioned the Ukraine as one such. And that's why I think, can't be certain, that they want one overarching agreement like that. Our argument, well, not just our argument, our position is, no, we're an independent state. You have free trade agreements with countries like Japan, Canada, and South Korea. You have an approach towards fisheries with Iceland, Norway, and the Faroes, which is bespoke and which respects the fact that they are independent coastal states and you negotiate on an annual basis. You have security arrangements with other countries. We want to have a good security partnership with you, but it's not because we're somehow a quasi-EU state. It's because we're a strong security partner with shared interests, but an independent country. And it's part of the approach that we take. Each of these agreements should be based on, wherever possible, existing precedents. And these existing precedents are all agreements that the EU has entered into with other sovereign nations.
Sometimes I think about how different this cabinet and this government is to the previous one. How we went from having Theresa May, her advisors, and her wet cabinet to having this strong and stable, robust government. So I'm kind of happy and slightly confident, more confident compared to the past about how the direction of this country, where it's going, especially with the trade negotiations. So things are good. Stay positive, everybody. So tonight we have the third episode of the Maya's Life vlog at 8 p.m. So if you've seen the last two episodes, we are now posting a daily video, obviously, as well as the 5:45 p.m. news show, this one. We'll also have the 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. Maya's Life vlogs, which is a daily vlog where I just take you through my day and do my own stuff and just talk about the political issues. Today, I'm going to be, there's a bit of a surprise in it, so make sure you to actually tune in at 8 o'clock to watch that. I want to say massive thank you to everyone who's been supporting me. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and click on that bell next to it so you get notified. As I mentioned, we are trying to create more content for you guys, especially during lockdown, to make sure that you guys watch these sort of channels rather than the mainstream media, BBC or Sky, because that's kind of boring and negative. And if you want to support the channel, become a member, check out the link in the description or find the join button next to subscribe underneath the video, or just go on your browser and type in youtube.com/myotc/join. If you have any ideas, if you're a member, make sure you use the community page to leave comments, give me suggestions, anything you need, and we'll look into it. I'm MyOTC. I'll see you guys in the next video.